A golden-haired man stood in a lush garden, lazily feeding a parrot perched on his finger. The sun illuminated his flawless features, giving his skin a soft, ethereal glow. His long, delicate fingers scattered seeds into the bird's beak as it chirped happily. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the quiet space. A man in a dark uniform skidded to a halt before the blonde figure, bowing deeply as he caught his breath. "Your Majesty, I have urgent news," the servant exclaimed, voice strained with excitement. The blonde man let the parrot flutter away into the azure sky. He turned toward the intruder with an indifferent gaze, brushing off the remaining seeds from his palms. He stood there, silent and regal, waiting. The sun continued to bathe his expressionless face, casting shadows across his angular features. "The ring has been found," the servant blurted, unable to contain himself. For the first time, the blond man's golden eyes sparkled with interest. His lips parted slightly, and a flicker of emotion passed through his cold demeanor before vanishing. A sharp slap echoed through the cramped room of a dingy inn. Blondina, a scrawny child with dirty blonde hair, stumbled backward, clutching her bleeding nose. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She was used to this. Too used to it. "You useless brat," roared Nordy, the innkeeper. His fat face was twisted in fury, and his hands shook with barely restrained violence. "How many times do I have to tell you? Clean the tables properly. You think I pay you to be lazy?" Blondina gritted her teeth. Blood dribbled from her nose, staining her tattered sleeves as she wiped at it clumsily. 2 shillings a week," she muttered under her breath. "And that's only because no one else would work for you. What did you say?" Nordy's hand rose again, fingers twitching. The girl flinched instinctively. When the blow came, it was hard and swift, knocking her head to the side. Pain shot through her skull, and she tasted blood on her lips. She didn't wait for him to hit her again. Her small, aching legs moved before her mind could catch up, and she bolted out of the room, racing through the inn's narrow halls and bursting out into the streets. The cold air stung her bruised face, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. She ran as fast as she could, her heart hammering in her chest like a caged bird. The village gates appeared in the distance, and only then did she slow down, gasping for breath. Blondina leaned against a wooden post, clutching the necklace hidden beneath her worn dress. Her mother's voice echoed faintly in her mind. "Blondina, always keep this with you. It's from your father." The necklace was old and frayed, but it was her most cherished possession. Nestled within the pouch that held it was a ring, a small, unassuming thing that seemed to sparkle even in the dimmest light. Her mother had told her it was the only thing her father left behind before abandoning them. A father she had never met, and one she had come to resent. Tears welled in her eyes again, but she furiously blinked them away. Crying wouldn't change anything. She had survived this long by being tough. Weakness was a luxury she couldn't afford. "I can't do this, Mom," she whispered, clutching the pouch tightly. "I need to survive, even if it means selling the ring." With newfound determination, she pushed herself away from the post and headed toward the only place that might give her a fair price for the ring, the jewelry store at the edge of the village. The bell above the door jingled as Blondina stepped into the jewelry shop. The scent of perfume and polish would fill the air, making her feel even more out of place in her ragged clothes. She fidgeted nervously as the owner, a balding old man with a magnifying glass in hand, looked up from behind the counter. "What do you want?" the man grumbled. "Good morning, sir," Blondina greeted softly. "I'm here to sell something." The old man's eyes narrowed. "Nordy send you again? That man should learn to keep his hands away from the gambling table if he doesn't want them chopped off." Blondina shook her head. "No, sir. It's my own this time." The jeweler raised a skeptical brow, but she ignored it. With trembling hands, she untied the small pouch around her neck and took out the ring. It clinked softly as it hit the glass countertop. The man picked it up with a dismissive glance until the light hit the gem set in the band. His expression changed instantly. He held the ring closer, his hands suddenly unsteady. His eyes widened as he inspected it under the magnifying glass. Where did you get this? He whispered hoarsely. Blondina shifted uneasily. It was my mother's. She said it was from my father. The jeweler's face drained of color. He set the ring down with shaking hands and gave Blondina a sharp look, as if she had suddenly grown fangs. Stay here, he ordered, almost stumbling as he rushed toward the door. Don't move. I'll be back soon. Blondina opened her mouth to protest, but the man was already gone, locking the door behind him. She stood there in the dimly lit shop, confusion and fear swirling in her mind. 2 days later, Blondina found herself in a carriage rolling toward the imperial castle. She hadn't even had time to process what had happened. One moment, she was at the jewelry store, and the next, the emperor himself had shown up, demanding to see the ring. Now, she was in the castle, living among silk sheets and velvet curtains, with servants waiting on her every whim. It felt like a dream, but it was also a nightmare. She didn't know why she was here, or what the emperor wanted from her. Sitting on the edge of the enormous bed, she stared at the ring in her hand. It sparkled innocently, as if unaware of the chaos it had caused. The soft knock on the door startled her. It was unusual for anyone to enter, except during mealtimes. The door creaked open, and several tall men in military uniforms stepped inside. Their presence was imposing, their movements precise and deliberate. And then he entered, a young man with golden hair that glimmered in the dim light. His face was strikingly handsome, but cold and distant, as if carved from marble. Blondina clutched the blanket around her shoulders as he approached. Tell me your name, he commanded, his voice smooth but edged with impatience. Blondina swallowed hard. Who are you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's sharp eyes narrowed slightly, but he remained calm. Your mother's name was Lily, correct? Blondina's heart skipped a beat. You knew my mother? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned for one of his servants to bring a candle. As the flame flickered, he tilted her chin up, examining her face with an unsettling intensity. You look just like her, he murmured, more to himself than to her. A mirror image. Blondina winced as a drop of hot wax landed on her collarbone. Ow! She gasped, but the man didn't apologize. Finally, he straightened and gave her a thin, humorless smile. My name is Tries Rin Habertiates, he said softly. I am the Emperor of Aes. And I, he paused, as if the words were foreign to him, am your father. Blondina's breath hitched. The room seemed to spin around her. Blondina opened her eyes wide. A soft, fragrant breeze wafted into the room through the large window, carrying the scent of blooming roses. Golden rays of sunlight streamed in, touching everything inside the chamber. The ivory walls, the silk curtains embroidered with silver threads, and the opulent chandelier above her bed. The child lay still, momentarily disoriented. It was as if she had woken up in a dream. She stared at the ceiling, tracing the ornate patterns of gold and ivory leaves swirling above her head. Then her gaze drifted toward the crystal vase on the nightstand, filled with exotic flowers she didn't know the names of. The sight made her heart ache. Yes, she whispered to herself, this is the imperial palace. It was a far cry from the rickety attic at the inn, with its leaky roof and mold-stained walls. This world, with its polished marble floors and embroidered tapestries, was too grand for someone like her. It felt foreign. An elaborate stage she'd been thrust upon without warning, her role still unknown. Her fate had changed as swiftly and abruptly as the wind changes direction. Yesterday, she was a nameless orphan, a servant at an inn where kindness was as rare as diamonds. Today, she was Blondina Rin Ates, a princess of the empire, born from an illicit affair between the emperor and her late mother. The memory of that encounter flashed in her mind. The emperor's cold smile, his dismissive words as he welcomed her into the family. You must not reveal your shameful past to anyone, he had said, as if his shame were hers to bear. Blondina clenched her fists under the silk blanket. She understood her position all too well. She was a stain on the royal lineage, an inconvenient truth to be hidden in a distant corner of the palace, far from the eyes of society. Her musings were interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. "Your Highness? Are you awake?" A soft voice called from outside. "Yes, come in," Blondina replied, sitting up slowly. Her limbs felt heavy, as if the weight of the palace's expectations had already settled on her thin shoulders. The door creaked open and a maid entered, bowing slightly. She was a petite woman, her face devoid of any particular emotion, a professional mask perfected over years of service. She carried herself with an air of formality, but there was no trace of warmth in her gaze. "His Majesty has invited you to a tea party this morning," the maid said, avoiding Blondina's eyes. "I'll guide you to the imperial garden." Blondina nodded, sliding off the bed. The cold marble floor sent a chill through her bare feet. She missed the rough but familiar feel of the wooden boards in the attic. For all its grandeur, this palace felt more like a gilded prison. The maid hesitated before speaking again. "The royal family will be waiting. Please be mindful of your behavior, Princess." There it was, an unspoken reminder that, despite her new title, she was still an outsider. Behave. Don't embarrass them. Stay invisible. Blondina lowered her head in silent acknowledgement and followed the maid through the grand corridors of the palace. The imperial garden was a sprawling expanse of greenery, bursting with vibrant flowers, neatly trimmed hedges, and ancient trees whose branches swayed gently in the morning breeze. A large fountain stood at the center, its water glittering under the sun like 1,000 diamonds. Stone statues of leopards, emblems of the royal family, dotted the garden, their marble eyes cold and watchful. Blondina's heart raced as she approached the gathering. Four figures sat around a polished oak table under the shade of a magnolia tree. The emperor, the empress, and 2 children, a boy and a girl. The air around them was thick with unspoken hierarchies and silent judgments. The emperor glanced up as Blondina arrived, setting his teacup down with deliberate slowness. His gaze swept over her, assessing her as one might inspect a flawed piece of jewelry. "Come closer," he commanded, his voice smooth yet devoid of warmth. Blondina stepped forward, her hands clenched at her sides to hide their trembling. The emperor rose from his seat, his tall frame casting a shadow over her. For a moment he simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, with a cold smile, he reached out and ran his hand through her golden hair. "You look like your mother," he murmured, almost to himself. There was no affection in his voice, only a hint of nostalgia, tinged with regret. Blondina held her breath, resisting the urge to pull away. The emperor's touch felt like ice against her scalp, a chilling reminder of her place in this world. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a low whisper. "Remember this, princess. Your origins are complicated, but no one needs to know that. Understand?" Blondina nodded, her throat tight with unspoken resentment. "You were found in another kingdom and brought back here," the emperor continued. "That's the story. Stick to it." "Yes, your majesty," Blondina whispered, lowering her gaze. "Good." The emperor straightened, smoothing his robe as if the conversation had been nothing more than a trivial matter. "Welcome to the palace, my daughter." The words sounded hollow, as if he were reciting a line from a play. Blondina forced herself to smile, though the gesture felt foreign on her lips. As she turned to leave, a sharp voice called out behind her, "Hey, you!" Blondina stopped in her tracks, her heart sinking. She recognized the voice. It belonged to the boy at the table, her half-brother, Prince Lart. The young prince marched up to her, his eyes gleaming with mischief. He was smaller than she expected, with cherubic features that belied the malice in his gaze. "So, you're the one they dragged in from the streets," he sneered, crossing his arms. "I thought you'd smell worse." Blondina bit her tongue, resisting the urge to snap back. She knew better than to engage in a battle of words with a royal brat. "What's your name again?" "Blondina." Lart tilted his head, his smile widening. "That sounds like a peasant's name." Were you raised by pigs? Blondina forced a polite smile. No, Your Highness. Cows. Actually, Lart's eyes narrowed. You're mocking me. I wouldn't dream of it, Blondina replied, her voice sweet as honey. The prince's face turned red with fury. You think you're clever, don't you? Well, let me tell you something, Blondina. Just because father took pity on you doesn't mean you belong here. Blondina tilted her head, her expression calm. Half of my blood is the emperor's, just like yours. Denying me would be denying him. You wouldn't want that, would you? Lart sputtered, caught off guard by her boldness. For a moment he stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides. Then, with a frustrated hug, from the corner of her eye, she saw a young woman approach. Lart, stop it, the girl said smoothly, her voice as clear and sharp as glass. It was Princess Adelaide, Lart's twin sister. She waved her hand with casual grace, dismissing her maid as if this was a mere annoyance. Her cold eyes settled on Blondina, and while Lart's anger was plain and impulsive, Adelaide's contempt ran deeper, like an invisible current waiting to pull someone under. You should stop now, too, Adelaide said quietly. Lart clenched his jaw, biting back further insults. Even he knew better than to defy his sister when she used that tone. The tension between the three of them tightened, suffocating the air with unspoken judgments. Blondina remained silent, knowing her place. It was becoming clear that these two siblings, although born of the same parents, couldn't have been more different in temperament. Where Lart raged openly, Adelaide wielded her disdain like a knife hidden behind a velvet glove. The princess's lips curled into a subtle, condescending smile. Yuni, she said mockingly, addressing Blondina with the word for an elder sister, if you ever insult the royal family, or even Lart again, I won't stand up for you. This is the last time I'm turning a blind eye to such unpleasant disturbances. Blondina held back a sigh. There was no winning with them. Every word she spoke seemed to offend. Every action was a misstep in their eyes. Still, she answered in the only way she could. I was merely walking. I came here, and suddenly your brother started accusing me, she said softly. I wouldn't classify myself as a disturbance in this situation. Adelaide's eyes narrowed, her smile becoming sharper. Are you saying Lart is a disturbance? Blondina wisely said nothing more. She had learned early on that it was safer to let their barb slide off her without reaction. Yet it puzzled her how deeply the twins despised her. They didn't even try to mask their hostility. She was treated as if her very existence sullied the royal bloodline. They'll never see me as anything but a stain on their perfect lives. Adelaide, however, was not finished. She studied Blondina with the same cold precision she might reserve for an insect pinned beneath her fingertips. The silence stretched uncomfortably until she finally turned to Lart. Let's go, she said, her voice smooth as silk. The siblings left in a flurry of bright fabrics and disdainful glances, their bickering fading into the distance. Blondina stood still for a moment, letting the quiet of the garden settle over her like a blanket. Strange kids, she muttered to herself, shaking her head. Turning away from the path they had taken, she wandered toward the guest palace. Unlike the grand, ostentatious main buildings, the guest palace was simpler, tucked away near the edge of the hunting grounds. Wildflowers swayed gently in the breeze, and clusters of trees dotted the landscape. As she walked, she tried not to think about her half-siblings, but their words lingered in her mind like a dull ache. It wasn't the first time they had reminded her of how little she belonged, and it wouldn't be the last. They don't even know me, yet they hate me. Why make such a fuss over father's embarrassing mistake? Blondina let out a quiet laugh at the thought, though it held no real humor. She bent down to pluck a daisy from the ground, twirling it absent-mindedly between her fingers. Just as she was about to continue on her way, a soft sound reached her ears, a faint, pitiful cry. She stopped, listening closely. It came again, and she followed the noise to a thick cluster of bushes nearby. Pushing the branches aside, she found a small black kitten huddled in the undergrowth. Oh, Blondina knelt down, her heart aching at the sight. The kitten's hind leg was twisted at an awkward angle, and a small gem sparkled on its forehead, nestled between its ears. "What a pretty cat," she whispered, reaching out cautiously. "I'm not a cat that—" The voice was so clear that Blondina blinked in surprise. Did you just talk?"